Hey, house kids, Eric here. Today's Saturday, January 30th, and I wanted to mention that House Kids services here at the Father's House have moved back inside on Sundays, which is great. If you guys can make it, I'd love to see you there. Remember, you all get to build a craft. There's activities and games, and we go over the same exact lesson that we do on these videos each week. We're following along in the Bible with these same lessons. As an example, this week we are going over Israel's first king, and that's what we'll be learning Sunday at church. So hope to see you there. But let's get into the lesson, shall we? We left off with Samuel. We're in 1 Samuel, and this week we're in chapters 8 through 15, so a big chunk. And this week's lesson is titled Israel's First King. They'd never had a king before, and they wanted one. Let's see what happens when they get one, all right? If you recall, Samuel was born from Hannah, and Hannah gave Samuel to the priests and to Eli, the priest, to grow up and become a priest and serve the Lord his whole life as a priest. And he did that, and he was very obedient to God. He was a great guy, okay? And he was kind of the last judge for Israel. The judges, if you remember, were just someone who was appointed by God to help guide his chosen people to follow his commandments and do the right thing, all right? And Samuel did that. But here we are at a point in history where the Israelites come to Samuel and say, we want a king. We want a king like the nations around us. And Samuel kind of knew that might not be the best thing, but Samuel, being Samuel, didn't sit there and argue with them. He went and prayed with God about it. It's something we should all do, right, when we have something that's troubling us. So he went to pray to God, and God told Samuel, you know what? If my chosen people want a king, then they can have a king. But first, please warn them, Samuel, about what that might be like, because it's not always good to have a king. And so Samuel did that. He went back to the Israelites and said, look, God said you could have a king. However, he wanted to warn you that it's not always good to have a king. What if you had a bad king? I mean, they have power over you. They can take land if they want to. They can automatically say, hey, I'm going to have some of your family members be, slaves for me. Kings can do kinds of things like that. And so, are you sure? And the Israelites were like, yeah, we totally want a king. It's what we told you. Let's have a king. So Samuel's like, all right. And so God appointed a man named Saul to be the king. And he told this to Samuel. And Samuel went to Saul and told Saul, God chose you to be the king. And Saul was like, what? Me? No. And Saul was actually surprised a little bit because he was from the tribe of Benjamin, and that was the smallest of the tribes. There wasn't a lot of them. And so he was just thinking, why would he ever choose me? Well, he did, all right? And when he was anointed by Samuel to be the king, and the crown on his head and all that jazz, and he was shown to the Israelites, here's your new king, the Israelites were like, yeah, Saul's our king. He's going to be the best king that ever was. And they were excited. However, as we learn in history, he was not the greatest king that ever was. He wasn't a very good king at all. He wasn't the worst king, but he definitely wasn't a great king. And let's learn about some of those things. I'm not going to go over all the things historically that he did that wasn't good, but let's go over a couple. One time, Saul and the Israelites were going to go fight the Philistines. Remember the Philistines? Remember from last week? The Israelites and the Philistines fought for many, many years. And so they're going to fight them again. But this time Saul noticed that there was a lot more Philistines than them. They had more chariots, more soldiers, more horses. He was a little concerned. And he thought, we need to make sure that God is with us on this. And that's good. Who wouldn't want God to be with you? But how he went about doing it is wrong. And we learned that last week, that there's a right way to have God come with you and a wrong way, right? He chose a wrong way. He thought, you know what? How about we give an offering up to the Lord, and then he'll be with us in this battle. That's a good idea. But he went to the tabernacle to give an offering up. But the rule is only priests can give an offering to the Lord. And the priests weren't there at the moment. It's kind of like lunch break or something. I don't know. They weren't there. Samuel wasn't there. And so he was getting impatient. Saul was like, come on, we got to go. And his soldiers are kind of standing there. His soldiers eventually go, all right, well, we're heading out because we got to go do this. And so Saul goes, that's it. I'm going to give the offering myself. And so he gives an offering to the Lord himself, even though he's not supposed to. And Samuel comes in, and Samuel sees it and says, what have you done? And Saul says, well, we're about to go to battle, and I wanted to give an offering to the Lord so the Lord would be with us. And Samuel says, you are being disobedient to the Lord. You know what? You're not going to be king for very long. Someone else is going to become king soon, and they will be more obedient than you. Ouch. Okay, and here's another time, a while later, where they go out to battle again against the Amalekites. And they defeat the Amalekites. Woohoo! But as we know, God usually tells the Israelites, when you go to these evil nations and you defeat them, I want you to destroy all the things. Don't take some of those false idols. Don't take some of those things with you, right? Destroy everything. And Saul did not do that. Saul only destroyed the things that he didn't want. And so he basically was like, oh, that's kind of nice. Let's keep that. And that's exactly what God didn't want them to do. And so Samuel hears about it and comes to him and says, Saul, what have you done? And Saul, like we do sometimes if we get caught and we get in trouble, instead of going, you know what, you're right. Oh, I messed up. I need to ask for God's forgiveness. Instead, he argues with him and tries to make it sound like what he did was actually okay. He says, oh, well, I just kept some of the best animals so I could give those as offering to the Lord. Samuel says, what you've done is disobedient to God, all right? And you know what? You are no longer going to be king. And he basically takes away his kingship. He says, you know what? Your obedience to God is more important than your offerings to him. And that's so true. And so he takes away the kingship from Saul. And now Saul is no longer the king. And that's this first king of Israel in the history of this world, right? And it's an important lesson and an important story. Now, next week, we're going to get into who is the next king. And I will say the next king is a much better king. He's a very good king. He's not perfect because, as we know, no one is perfect. And that's one of the questions I had for you guys is anyone on earth, has anyone ever been perfect other than Jesus? No, no one has. I'm not, you're not, your parents aren't, no one is, right? And so when the Israelites said, we want another human being to be king over us instead of God, we knew it wasn't going to work out very well, right? Wouldn't it be much better to have God as our king? And that was their big mistake. The other thing I really liked, and it's so true, is that when Samuel said, you know what, your obedience is more important to God than your offerings, right? God wants us to be obedient to him more than he wants us to try and give him things, right? He loves it when we're obedient to him because he knows what's best for us. So anyways, that's this lesson. Saul, the first king of Israel, not a very good king. However, next week we'll learn about someone, you probably already know their name. The second king is quite famous, and he was a pretty good king. All right, so I got some printouts for you. If you look in the description down below, you can see there's a link to a folder which has the video for this week's lesson. You could watch it. And there's also some printouts. The coloring sheet of the week, it says, God's people wanted a king like the nations around them. And here you go. It's a cool little picture. You got here Samuel and Eli. And then I have fun little activity sheet, Find Saul. All right, and here's a little picture. This is not that difficult. You kids can get this. Some of these are challenging and some of them are kind of easy. I feel like this one's easy, but you got to find Saul. Find Saul hidden in the picture below. Use the close-up of Saul at the bottom right corner to help you recognize him. That's how they show what he looks like in this cartoon. So see if you can find him. Lots of people there. Good luck. All right, well, that's this week's lesson. I hope you guys are doing well. Hope to see you at church for House Kids. You guys take care, and we will see you next week. Later.